The gunshot echoed across the Arizona night. Silas Monroe stood in the doorway of his ranch house, rifle pressed against his shoulder, facing down 6 mounted men. Behind him, Clara Hartwell, the woman he never expected to love, pressed a blood-soaked cloth against the wound in his shoulder. "Give her up, Monroe." Thaddeus Pritchard sat tall in his saddle torch, flame-dancing shadows across his face. "Or you both die tonight." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. "She's not yours. Never was." Clara's whisper cut through the dark. "Silas, don't die for me." He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. The torchlight caught the wetness on her cheeks. His voice came out, steady, certain. "If I don't fight for you, what the hell am I living for? How does a mail-order bride rejected at a train station become worth dying for? The answer begins 8 weeks earlier, when all that existed was a broken promise and a woman who refused to give up. Copper Springs, Arizona Territory, July 1884. The train's wheels screamed against iron rails as it pulled into Copper Springs Station. Clara Hartwell gripped the handle of her trunk, knuckles white beneath travel-worn gloves. 3 days of coal smoke and stranger sweat clung to her blue calico dress. The same dress she'd worn when her mother kissed her goodbye in Ohio. The same dress she'd saved for meeting her future husband. Through the window, the Arizona sun hammered down on weathered platform boards. A water barrel stood beside the depot office tin dipper hanging from a rusted chain. Beyond that, the town spread out like something left to die in the heat, false front buildings, the color of old bone, a white church steeple rising against brown hills. Clara's hand found the daguerreotype in her pocket. She'd looked at it so many times, the edges had worn soft. Thaddeus Pritchard, 35 years old. Tall, dark mustache groomed to sharp points. Standing beside a buckboard wagon with his shoulders squared like a man who knew his place in the world. 7 months of letters between them. 7 months of careful words on expensive paper. His first letter, "I need a wife who can work hard and keep a home. I don't require beauty or wealth. Only honesty and a willingness to build something new in this hard country." Her reply, "I can cook, so tend livestock. I nursed my grandmother through 2 winters of fever. I'm not afraid of hard work. I only ask for a roof and a man who keeps his word." She hadn't mentioned the leg. The accident, when she was 8, falling from the hayloft onto frozen ground, the bone shattering in 3 places. The doctor did his best. It wasn't enough. The leg healed crooked. She learned to walk with it, learned to work with it, learned to see people's eyes slide away from it. Not lying, just leaving things out. The conductor's voice cut through her thoughts. Copper Springs final stop. Clara stood. Her left leg complained, always did after sitting too long. She ignored it. 27 years of ignoring it had taught her how. The platform boards burned through her shoes. Heat rose in waves that made the distant buildings shimmer like something half real. She scanned the faces. 3 men waited by the station office. None matched the photograph. Then she saw him. Thaddeus Pritchard stood beside his buckboard exactly as the daguerreotype had shown. Brown vest, sun-weathered face hat pushed back to reveal dark hair, slicked with pomade. Taller than she'd imagined. Broader in the shoulders. He was watching the passengers descend. Clara raised her hand, a small wave, nothing presumptuous, just acknowledgement. She stepped forward. 1 step, normal. 2 steps. Her left leg dragged slightly, the familiar hitch in her gait she'd carried since childhood. 3 steps. She saw his eyes narrow. The change in his expression happened fast. Too fast for her to pretend she hadn't seen it. Curiosity became recognition. Recognition became something darker. His gaze dropped to her feet, watching her walk. The uneven rhythm, the way she compensated with her right side. Clara kept moving forward. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but she kept her chin up. She'd walked this walk for 19 years. She knew how to make it look deliberate instead of desperate. But Thaddeus Pritchard wasn't watching her dignity. He was watching her limp. When she stood 10 feet away, he shook his head. Once. Clear. Final. Then he climbed onto the buckboard, snapped the reins, and drove away. The wagon wheels churned up dust that hung golden in the afternoon light. Clara stood with her hands still half raised, watching the buckboard turn the corner, past the livery stable and disappear. Gone. She lowered her hand. Her fingers trembled. She pressed them against her skirt until they stopped. Around her, the platform emptied. A family with 2 children loaded into a hired hack. A salesman in a checkered suit argued with a porter over luggage fees. An elderly woman clutched a carpet bag and hurried toward the depot office. Clara stood alone with her trunk. The sun beat down on her bonnet. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck, soaking into her collar. The nicest dress she owned. She'd worn it to make a good impression. A fly buzzed near her ear. She didn't swat it away. "Ma'am," the voice came from behind. She turned to find an elderly man in a railroad cap, his face creased with concern. The station master. His name tag read E. Hayes. "Ma'am, you got folks coming for you." Clara looked at him, then she looked at the empty street where the buckboard had vanished. Then she sat down on her trunk, removed her bonnet, and fanned herself slowly with it. "Not anymore. I reckon not anymore." Hayes shifted his weight. "That was Thaddeus Pritchard's wagon, wasn't it?" "It was." "And you're the lady he sent for from back east, from Ohio," she kept fanning. The motion gave her something to do with her hands. "I'm the lady he sent for, and I'm the lady he decided he didn't want." The station master's mouth pressed into a thin line. He glanced down at her leg, then quickly away. Clara knew he understood exactly what had happened. "That ain't right. Man ought to at least say something." "It's done." Her voice came out flat. She couldn't afford the luxury of anger. Anger took energy, and energy took money, and money was something she had almost none of. She opened the small drawstring purse tucked into her sleeve, counted the coins by touch. $2.37. Everything left in the world. 4 nights at 50 cents would leave her with 37 cents to figure out what came next. "Is there a boarding house in town, somewhere respectable?" Hayes pointed down the main street. "Widow Brennan takes boarders. 50 cents a night, meals included." "Where would I find Mrs. Brennan?" "Third house past the Mercantile, yellow shutters." Clara stood. Her leg had stiffened from sitting. She worked it carefully, feeling the old ache settle back into familiar places. Then she gripped the rope handle of her trunk. "Mr. Hayes, is there work to be had around here? For a woman?" He scratched his jaw, thinking. "Hotel might need kitchen help." He hesitated. "There's a place about 2 miles out, the Monroe Ranch. Man, there's been poorly since the spring floods hit. His sister died of fever 2 years back." After that, Hayes shook his head. His hands quit on him. "Doc stopped making visits. From what I hear, he's just lying there waiting to die." Clara looked past the edge of town where the land rose into brown hills dotted with sage. 2 miles on her leg in this heat carrying a trunk. But then again, everything else seemed impossible too. "How do I find it?" 2 miles east on the red dirt road. You'll know the place when you see it." He paused. "Ma'am, what Pritchard did, that ain't it how most folks are. You remember that." Clara didn't answer. She just picked up her trunk and started walking toward the yellow shutters. Behind her, Hayes called out one more time. "Name's Silas Monroe. Good man before grief got hold of him. If you can help him, you'd be doing this whole town a service." She didn't turn around, just kept walking one uneven step at a time. The Monroe Ranch. Dawn next day. Clara left Widow Brennan's boarding house before sunrise. The old woman had tried to talk her out of it. 2 miles in this heat, with that leg child, you'll collapse before you get halfway. But Clara had walked 2 miles before. She'd walk 2 miles again. What choice did she have? 4 nights of boarding house meals would eat through her money. Then what? Beg on street corners. Wire her mother for train fare home back to the same Ohio town that had watched her limp through 27 years of pitying looks. No. She'd come west for a new life. She'd find one with or without Thaddeus Pritchard. The canteen Mrs. Brennan insisted she take grew lighter with each sip. The trunk seemed to gain weight with every step. Clara stopped twice, once under the sparse shade of a mesquite tree, once beside a red rock outcropping that gave maybe 2 feet of shadow. The sun climbed. The sky turned from pink to white-hot blue. Sweat soaked through her dress, her petticoat, everything. Her left leg went from aching to burning to a dull throb that promised worse if she didn't rest soon. Then she saw it. The Monroe Ranch sat in a shallow valley like something the desert was slowly reclaiming. The main house showed gray weathered wood where paint had long since peeled away. 2 windows hung crooked on rusted hinges. The porch sagged into middle boards rotting through in places. A vegetable garden sprawled beside the house, overgrown with weeds but still showing signs of life. Yellow squash split open and rotting on the vine. Tomato plants gone wild, fruit red and bursting. Onions with their green tops flopped over in the dirt. In the corral, a bay mare stood, with her head, low ribs pressed against the dull coat flies thick around her eyes. No smoke from the chimney, no sound but chickens scratching in the dust. Clara set down her trunk and wiped sweat from her eyes. The smell hit her when she got closer to the house. Sickness, the sweet rot smell of infection and unwashed flesh. The smell of someone dying alone. She knocked on the door. No answer. Knocked again. The door swung inward on groaning hinges. The room inside lay dim after the brutal sunlight. Clara's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw him. A man lay on a rough wooden bed against the far wall. Maybe 30 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell with his face slack and gray. Dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. His left arm lay across his stomach, wrapped in rags that had once been white. Clara crossed the room. Her fingers found his forehead. Burning. She peeled back the edge of the bandage. The smell sharpened rot and infection unmistakable. Beneath the filthy cloth, his forearms showed swollen tight, the skin angry red. And crawling up from the wound past his wrist, creeping toward his elbow, red streaks thin as spider silk. Blood poisoning. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. Once it reaches the heart, there's nothing to be done. 2 miles back to town. At least 2 hours, maybe 3. Clara looked at the man's face. His cracked lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. He might not have 2 hours. She found the well pump behind the house. It groaned when as she worked the handle, coughing out rust-colored water that slowly ran clear. She filled a basin and carried it inside her leg, protesting every step. The stove was cold, dead ashes. She scraped them out, found kindling in a box beside the hearth, struck a match from the tin on the mantel. The wood caught. She fed it larger pieces until the fire held steady, then set the basin on top to heat. The man on the cot hadn't moved. Clara searched the kitchen. A cracked bar of lye soap on the washstand. A half-empty bottle of whiskey in the cupboard. Clean rags, none. She looked down at her petticoat. The white cotton her mother had hemmed before she left Ohio. Her scissors were in the trunk she'd left at the boarding house. She found a paring knife in a drawer, tested the edge against her thumb, and began to cut. The fabric tore in long strips. She folded them, set them beside the heating water, and turned back to the cot. First, she had to see what she was dealing with. The old bandages came away in pieces, stuck to the wound with dried blood and pus. She worked slowly, soaking each section with warm water before peeling it back. The man groaned but didn't wake. His head turned on the pillow, lips moving around words she couldn't hear. The wound itself was ugly. A gash across the meat of his forearm, maybe 4 inches long, deep enough to see white tissue beneath. The edges were swollen, weeping yellow fluid. The smell made her eyes water. The red lines had climbed past his wrist, now thin as thread, reaching toward his elbow. Clara dipped a clean rag in the hot water, added soap, and began to scrub. He screamed. His good arm swung up wild and caught her across the cheek. The basin flew from her hands, water splashing across the floor. Clara stumbled back, her hip hitting the edge of the table. For a moment they stared at each other, she standing with her hand pressed to her stinging face. He half risen on the cot, eyes unfocused and terrified. "Lydia," he rasped. "Lydia, the cattle." "Hush now." Clara kept her voice low, steady. "Ain't no Lydia here, just me." His eyes searched her face without recognition. Then the strength went out of him and he collapsed back onto the mattress, chest heaving. Clara picked up the basin, refilled it, heated it again. This time when she cleaned the wound, she pinned his good arm beneath her knee. Her grandmother had taught her this, the slow, patient work of pulling poison from infected flesh. No lancing, no cutting. Just heat and pressure and time. When the worst of the pus had drained, she washed the wound again with soap and whiskey. He cursed and thrashed but didn't fully wake. She wrapped his arm in clean strips of her petticoat and tied them firm. Then she brewed willow bark tea. There was bark in a jar on the shelf. Someone had gathered it once. She steeped it until the water turned brown, then carried the cup to the cot. Getting the tea into him was harder than cleaning the wound. His jaw clenched. His head turned away. She cupped his chin, forced his mouth open, poured in small sips. He choked, swallowed, choked again. Half the tea ended up on his shirt. Half went down his throat. It would have to be enough. Night fell. The kerosene lamp burned low. Clara found tallow candles in a drawer and lit two, setting them on the table where their glow reached the cot. The man's fever climbed. His skin burned under her palm. Sweat soaked through the mattress. He muttered names she didn't know. Lydia, always Lydia. And sometimes a man's name, Thomas, she thought. Clara sat in the chair beside him and talked, not because he could hear, but because the silence felt too much like death waiting. She talked about Ohio, about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking in winter, about the letters from Thaddeus Pritchard read so many times the paper wore thin at the folds, about the train ride west, 3 days of dust and strangers, her leg aching in the cramped seat. She talked about the station platform, about standing there with her trunk while the buckboard drove away. He didn't even say nothing, just looked at my leg and left, like I wasn't worth the breath to speak a word. The man on the cot didn't answer, but his thrashing had stilled. His breathing had slowed. The second night was worse. His fever spiked so high his whole body shook. Clara soaked rags in cool water and laid them across his forehead, his chest, his neck. She changed the bandages twice when yellow fluid seeped through. She forced more willow bark tea past his cracked lips, drop by drop, until her arms ached from holding his head. By the third dawn, she hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. She sat slumped in the chair, her hand resting on his good arm, watching the light creep across the floor. The candles had burned to stubs. The fire had gone to embers. She was too tired to rebuild it. Then she felt it, the sudden cooling of his skin, the sweat turning from burning to clammy, his face gray for so long, taking on a faint flush of color. The fever had broken. Clara leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes, just for a moment, just until she could gather strength to check his bandages. She woke to a voice. "Who are you?" Her eyes snapped open. Morning light filled the room. The man on the cot was watching her, his gaze clear and sharp and deeply suspicious. Clara straightened. Her neck was stiff. Her whole body ached. She was too tired for careful words. "Name's Clara. I was supposed to marry Thaddeus Pritchard, but he didn't want me. Now I'm here." She paused. "You ain't dead yet, so I reckon that's something." He stared at her. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't quite form. "You Pritchard's woman was supposed to be—" He took one look at my leg and changed his mind. A long silence. His eyes dropped to her feet, then came back to her face. "Then he's a damn fool." That's what I figured too. He tried to sit up and gasped, his hand flying to his bandaged arm. His face went white. "Easy." Clara pressed him back down. "You've been real sick. Blood poisoning. You're through the worst, but that arm's going to need tending for a good while yet." He looked at the clean bandages, at her face, at the strips of white cotton wrapped around his forearm. "Is that—" His voice cracked. "Is that a petticoat?" "Was. Seemed like you needed it more than I did." He lay back against the pillow. His eyes found something on the wall, a sampler Clara saw now. Embroidered letters spelling out a name and date. "Lydia," he said quietly. "You kept saying that name while I was sick." Clara hadn't said it. He had, but she held her tongue and waited. "My sister." His voice went flat, automatic. "She made that when she was 12 years old. Hung in our mother's kitchen for years. I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be. She's been gone 2 years now." The words came out like stones dropping into still water. No emotion, just fact. The sound of a man who'd practiced not feeling until he'd mastered it. Clara stood. Her leg had stiffened while she slept. She worked it carefully. "What's your name?" "Silas. Silas Monroe." "Well, Mr. Monroe, I'm going to make you some breakfast, and you're going to eat it, and then we're going to talk about what comes next." She turned toward the kitchen. Behind her, his voice followed. "Why?" She stopped. "Why what? Why'd you do this? Stay here, take care of me. You don't know me, don't owe me nothing." Clara looked back at him, looked at this broken man in his broken house in the middle of nowhere. "My grandmother used to say, when you see someone needs help, you don't ask why. You just ask what you can do. I could help you. So I did." 3 weeks later, the days took on a rhythm. Dawn. Clara woke in the chair beside the cot later in the small room that had been Lydia's. She checked Silas's bandages, changed them if the cloth had yellowed overnight, then pumped water for the basin and set it to heat. Mornings she cooked what she could find. Beans from a sack in the larder. Cornmeal she mixed with water and fried in the bacon grease left in a tin by the stove. Coffee black and bitter brewed in a dented pot. Silas ate without comment. He watched her move around the kitchen, his eyes following her uneven gait, but he said nothing about it. By the fourth day, he could sit up on his own. By the sixth, he made it to the chair by the window. Clara scrubbed the kitchen floor. The wood had gone gray with grime, tracked over in patterns she could read door to stove, stove to cot, nowhere else. The same path walked over and over by a man who'd stopped caring about the rest. She got down on her knees with a brush and bucket of soapy water. The bristles scraped against the boards. Dirty water pooled in the cracks, and she soaked it up with rags, wrung them out, kept scrubbing. "You don't have to do that." Silas's voice came from the chair by the window. She didn't look up. "Floor's filthy. Been filthy for months. Another day won't matter. Matters to me." She heard him shift in the chair, but didn't hear him argue further. When she finally sat back on her heels, the wood grains showed through pale and clean. The windows came next. She washed them inside and out, standing on a crate to reach the top panes. The glass was so coated with dust, she had to scrub twice before the light came through clear. On the seventh day, she found the vegetable garden. It sprawled behind the house, bordered by a sagging fence. Weeds had taken over most of it, bindweed and pigweed, and something with thorns she didn't recognize. But underneath the tangle, she found survivors. Tomatoes split and overripe on the vine. Yellow squash the size of her forearm. Onions with their green tops flopped over in the dirt. She spent the morning on her knees pulling weeds, salvaging what she could. Her hands turned black with soil. Sweat dripped down her temples. Her leg throbbed from crouching. But she kept working until she had a basket full of vegetables and a cleared patch of earth. That evening she made soup. Real soup tomatoes and onions and squash simmered with salt and a pinch of pepper she found in a jar on the shelf. She served it in chipped bowls with fresh bread on the side, the loaf still steaming from the oven. Silas ate slowly, methodically. He didn't speak until his bowl was empty. Then he set down his spoon and looked at her. "Thank you." 2 words, but the way he said them, like they cost him something, made Clara's throat tight. On the 8th day, he told her about Lydia. They were sitting on the porch, he in a chair she dragged out from the kitchen, she on the top step with her bad legs stretched in front of her. The sun was setting, the sky turning colors she had no names for. "Lydia was younger," he said suddenly. "Just 5 years between us, but she acted like she was my mother after Ma passed. Took care of everything, the house palmy." Clara turned her head slightly but didn't speak. Winter of '82 fever swept through the county. Half the folks got it. Most recovered. He paused. She didn't. "I'm sorry. She was the last family I had. Parents gone years before. No wife, no children. Just Lydia and me working this place together." His voice stayed flat. "Then it was just me." Clara looked out at the darkening hills. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, and another answered. She felt his eyes on her, then not on her face, but lower on her legs stretched out on the step. How'd it happen? She could have deflected. Could have changed the subject the way she'd learned to do when people stared too long or asked too many questions. But something in his voice, the same flatness he'd used when talking about Lydia, made her answer straight. "Hayloft. I was 8. Ladder broke and I fell wrong. Shattered the bone in 3 places." She shrugged. "Doc did his best, but it never healed right. Grew up crooked." Silas nodded slowly. He didn't say he was sorry, didn't offer sympathy or advice or any of the things people usually said. He just nodded like she'd told him the weather. It was the kindest response she'd ever received. The next morning, she washed the checkered curtains she'd found balled up in a corner. They'd been white once, she thought, or maybe cream. Now they were gray with dust and spotted with something that might have been grease or mold. She scrubbed them in the basin, wrung them out, hung them on the line behind the house. When they dried, she ironed them with the flat iron she heated on the stove, pressing out the wrinkles until the fabric lay smooth. The curtains went back up in the kitchen window. Afternoon light filtered through them, softer now. Silas stood in the doorway watching. "Looks different. Looks like somebody lives here." He was quiet for a long moment. "The flood hit 3 months back. Killed half my cattle. Rest scattered to the hills, and I couldn't track them alone. Hands quit when I couldn't pay." He leaned against the door frame, his healing arm braced against the wood. I was out riding fence when another storm came through. Horse spooked, threw me into the barbed wire. That's how I got the arm. He stopped. By the time the infection started getting bad, you just lay here, Clara said, not a question. First month I could still work. Second month the infection started. He stopped again. By then I figured it didn't matter much one way or the other. She turned to look at him. His face was thin, the bones sharp under the skin. His eyes were the color of creek water, gray-green and murky. You wanted to die? He didn't answer. Didn't have to. Clara smoothed down her apron. Her hands were rough now, the knuckles cracked, the nails broken short. Well, she said, I reckon it's a good thing I showed up when I did. She walked past him into the kitchen. Behind her she heard him draw breath like he was about to speak. But when she glanced back, he was just staring at the curtains, his expression unreadable. Copper Springs. 3 weeks and 2 days after arrival, Clara needed supplies. The flour was nearly gone, the coffee down to dregs, the salt tin empty. Silas had recovered enough to be left alone for a few hours. He could walk now, though he still favored the injured arm. He counted out money from a leather pouch, $3.40. Everything he had left. Take 2, Clara said, pushing back the extra. I don't need more than that. Take it all. Get what you need. I need flour and salt and coffee. That's $1, maybe less. Keep the rest. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he swept the extra coins back into his palm without another word. Silas, she said as she reached the door, how long do you want me to stay? He was sitting by the window looking out at the land he'd almost let kill him. You thinking of leaving? I'm asking if you want me to. No. The word came out harder than he probably meant. He cleared his throat. Stay as long as you're willing. Until you don't need me anymore, then. She rode Sadie the bay mare fattened now on regular feed into Copper Springs. The town looked the same as it had 3 weeks ago. Same false front buildings, same dusty street, same people going about their same small lives. She tied Sadie outside Perkins' Mercantile and went in. The bell above the door jingled. Mr. Perkins looked up from his ledger. His expression went carefully neutral when he recognized her. Help you. Flour, please. 5 pounds, and salt a pound. Coffee if you have it. He moved along the shelves, pulling down a sack of flour, scooping salt into a paper cone, measuring coffee beans into a tin. His movements were efficient, practiced. He didn't look at her face. That'll be $1.15. Clara counted out the coins. Her fingers brushed his palm as she handed them over. He pulled back quickly like she'd burned him. Thank you kindly. Mm-hmm. 2 women stood at the fabric bolts in the back of the store. Clara recognized one of them, the gray hair, the sharp nose, the mouth pinched, like she'd been sucking lemons. Mrs. Pritchard, Thaddeus's mother. Their eyes met. Mrs. Pritchard didn't look away. She held Clara's gaze for a long moment, her expression flat and cold. Then she turned to her companion and spoke in a voice pitched to Carrie. Living out there alone with him. No ring on her finger and her limping around like that. She shook her head slowly. Some women got no shame at all. The companion murmured something in response. Mrs. Pritchard laughed a small, mean sound. Lord knows what she had to do to get him to take her in. Clara's hand was resting on a bolt of calico blue, the color of the sky, just before dusk. She hadn't meant to touch it, hadn't meant to linger, but now her fingers had frozen against the fabric and she couldn't seem to make them move. She set the calico down. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. She picked up her goods, tucked them under her arm, and walked to the door. The bell jingled as she pushed it open. The sunlight hit her face. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked to the hitching post, loaded her supplies into the saddlebags, and fumbled with the buckles until they closed. Miss, the voice came from behind her. She turned to find an elderly man in a leather apron, his hands blackened with soot. The blacksmith she'd seen his forge at the end of the street. Let me help you with that. He took the saddlebag from her hands, adjusted the straps, secured them properly against Sadie's flank. His movements were gentle, unhurried. Name's Elijah Hayes. I knew Silas's daddy back in the day. Good man. His son's cut from the same cloth. Clara didn't trust herself to speak. Hayes straightened up, brushed his hands against his apron. His eyes were kind. Don't let them get to you, miss. Small towns got small minds. He paused. Mrs. Brennan knows where you are if there's trouble. She's good people. He walked back to his forge without waiting for a response. The rhythmic clang of his hammer started up again, steady and sure. Clara mounted Sadie and rode out of town without looking back. The ride home took longer than the ride in. She let Sadie set the pace. The sun beat down on her shoulders. Dust coated her dress, her hands, her face. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that crying did nothing. It didn't change the shape of her leg, or the opinions of strangers, or the fact that she was 27 years old with no home, no family, no future. So she didn't cry. She just rode and let the heat bake the hurt into something harder. Silas was on the porch when she returned. He stood as she dismounted, came down the steps to take Sadie's reins. His eyes moved over her face, reading something there. Get what you needed. Yes. She unloaded the saddlebags herself. Flour, salt, coffee. She carried them inside, set them on the kitchen table, began putting them away. Silas followed her to the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching. Something happened in town. No. Clara, I said no. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She turned away, busying herself with the flour, pouring it into the tin canister by the stove. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter until they stopped. Silas didn't push. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, then turned and walked back outside. She heard his boots on the porch, heard the chair creak as he sat down. She finished putting away the supplies, made dinner, served it in silence. They ate without speaking. The food tasted like nothing. That night, Clara lay in the narrow bed in the room that had been Lydia's. The walls were thin. She could hear Silas moving around in the main room, hear the creak of his cot as he settled in for the night. She reached for Lydia's shawl, folded at the foot of the bed. The wool was soft against her fingers, the color of autumn leaves. She pulled it over her shoulders and breathed in the faint smell of lavender that still clung to the fibers. She pressed her face into the pillow. The tears came then, hot and silent, soaking into the cotton. She cried for Ohio, for her grandmother, for the life she'd thought she was coming to. She cried for the look on Mrs. Pritchard's face, for the storekeeper's eyes sliding away, for the word shameful hanging in the air like smoke. She cried until there was nothing left. In the main room on the other side of the thin wall, Silas lay awake and listened, the decision. Morning came cold. Clara woke with her eyes swollen, her throat raw. She lay still for a moment, staring at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling. Then she rose, dressed, opened her trunk. She was folding her spare dress when Silas appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? I'm leaving. No. I heard what happened in town yesterday. Mrs. Brennan sent a boy with a message. Clara kept folding, her movements precise. The whole town's talking. Let them talk. I will not be the reason decent folks cross the street when they see you coming. Those folks ain't decent. They're all you got. Her voice broke. She stopped, pressed her hand against her mouth, collected herself. I've been here 3 weeks, Silas. 3 weeks. And I've already cost you your credit, your standing in town, and whatever chance you had of rebuilding this place. She turned to look at him, her eyes dry but raw. I'm poison to you. Can't you see that? He stepped into the room. You saved my life. And now I'm ruining it. No. The word came out loud enough to echo. He crossed the room in 3 strides, caught her hands, pulled them away from the trunk. Listen to me. Those people in town, they don't matter. The bank doesn't matter. None of it matters. Then what does... The silence stretched between them. She could feel her pulse under his fingers, fast and uneven. Could see something working in his face, some word trying to fight its way out. You, he said finally, you matter. Clara's breath caught. You gave me a reason to wake up, to care about tomorrow. Before you came, I was just... He stopped, started again. I was just waiting to and you made me want to live. Silas, stay. Please, just stay. She looked at him for a long moment. Looked at this man who'd been half dead when she found him, who'd fought his way back from the edge, who was asking her to stay not because he needed a housekeeper, but because he needed her. Slowly, she pulled her hands free, turned back to the trunk, and began unpacking. She didn't say yes, didn't say I'll stay, just took her dress back out and hung it on its hook. But Silas saw her hands stop shaking. saw the set of her shoulders ease, and he knew. The weeks that followed moved like the seasons, slow at first, then gathering momentum until Clara could hardly remember what the ranch had looked like when she arrived. Silas's strength returned in stages, first walking to the porch without leaning on the doorframe, then making it to the barn without stopping to catch his breath. By the fourth week, he could lift a hammer without his arm shaking. The chicken coop needed fixing. Half the boards had rotted through, leaving gaps wide enough for a coyote to slip through. Clara found him standing in front of it one morning, a board propped against his hip, staring at the damage like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "You going to fix it or just look at it?" He turned, his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close, thinking about how to hold the board and swing the hammer at the same time. Clara walked over her gait, uneven on the rough ground. She took the board from his hip and positioned it against the gap, holding it flush with the frame. "I'll hold. You hammer." He looked at her for a moment. Then he fished a handful of nails from his pocket and set the first one against the wood. The hammer swung. The nail bit in. He swung again, driving it home. They worked in silence, moving around the coop section by section. The sun climbed higher. Sweat trickled down Clara's temples, soaking into her collar. But the work felt good, solid, real. "My grandmother could build a barn if she had to," Clara said when they paused for water. "She taught me to hold nails in my mouth so I'd always have one ready." "Sounds like a woman I'd have liked to meet." "You'd have been scared of her." "Everybody was." He didn't argue the point. When they finished, the door swung smooth and latched with a solid click. Silas tested it twice. Open, closed, open, closed. "Not bad. My grandmother would say it'll do." Something flickered in his eyes, almost amusement. The days found their shape after that. Clara cooked clean, tended the garden. She mended clothes she found in the trunk by Silas's bed shirts with frayed collars, trousers with worn knees. Her stitches were small and even, almost invisible against the faded fabric. Silas cared for the animals. The bay mare Sadie had filled out under regular feeding, her coat regaining its shine. He walked her each morning, checking her hooves, brushing the dust from her flanks. They ate together, worked together, sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sun go down. One afternoon, Silas brought out the books. They were stacked on a shelf in the corner of the main room, half hidden behind old newspapers. Shakespeare, the binding worn. Dickens, Great Expectations, and Oliver Twist, both well thumbed. A Bible with names written inside the front cover in faded ink. "You read all these?" Silas was sitting by the window, whittling a piece of wood into something that might have been a spoon. He looked up. "Lydia taught me. Said a man who can't read is only half alive." "Smart woman." She was. Clara turned the Bible over in her hands. The names inside were listed in a column, dates of birth carefully recorded. 3 had been crossed out with a single black line. Only Silas's remained untouched. She set the Bible back on the shelf without comment. "You can read too," Silas said, not a question, "and write, and do sums." And she straightened the stack of books. "My grandmother said a woman who can't keep her own accounts is at the mercy of any man who can." "Your grandmother sounds like she was something." "She was." Silas set down his whittling. His eyes stayed on her face, thoughtful. "You ain't just some farm girl from Ohio." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just walked past him to the kitchen where the coffee pot sat waiting on the stove. Week 5. Finding the cattle. They found the cattle on a Tuesday morning, exactly 5 weeks after Clara had arrived. What was left of them anyway? Silas said he'd had 20 head before the floods. Half had died in the rising water. The rest had scattered into the hills, too spooked to find their way back. "We could look for it, Clara said. Silas was mending a bridle, his fingers working the leather with the patience of long practice. "They could be anywhere in 100 square miles. Then we ride 100 square miles." He looked up. "You ever tracked cattle before?" "No, but I can learn." They set out the next morning at dawn. Silas on Buck, a rangy gelding with a white blaze down his face. Clara on Sadie. They rode east toward the canyon country where Silas said the cattle might have gone looking for water. The land rose in waves of red rock and sage. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals in the thin air. The sun climbed and the temperature climbed with it until Clara could feel sweat running down her spine. "There," Silas pointed toward a narrow draw between two ridges. See the tracks? Clara saw nothing but dirt and rock, but she trusted him. They turned their horses into the draw. The canyon opened up into a box valley maybe 2 acres across, and there bunched up against the far wall where a seep created a patch of green 8 cows. Thin, wild-eyed, but alive. Easy now, Silas murmured. We spook them, they'll scatter again. When they worked the cattle slow and careful, using the canyon walls to funnel them back toward the mouth of the valley. Clara had never herded anything larger than chickens, but she watched Silas and did what he did, positioning her horse to block escape routes, moving quiet and steady. One cow broke free. Clara didn't think. She just kicked Sadie forward and cut it off, waving her arms and shouting. The cow wheeled confused, and Silas caught it with his rope. Good, he called across the distance. Real good. By the time they got the cattle back to the ranch, the sun was setting, and both of them were covered in dust. But 8 cows were pen safe, and something in Silas's face had changed, like he'd remembered what it felt like to accomplish something. That night on the porch, he pulled out his harmonica. The first notes came out tentative, uncertain. Then he found his way into a melody, something slow and sweet that reminded Clara of summer evenings in Ohio. Without thinking, she began to hum along. They sat like that as the stars came out. She humming, he playing, the music rising into the darkness. When the song ended, neither spoke. The silence felt different now. Fuller. Clara, she turned. He was looking at her, the harmonica still in his hands. That's the first time you've said my name without Miss in front of it. Is it? He turned the harmonica over in his fingers. Seemed like it was time. She rose from the step, meaning to go inside to check on the bread she'd left rising. Her foot caught on a loose board. Her weight shifted wrong. She stumbled. His hand caught her elbow. The grip was firm, careful. He'd used his bad arm, she realized. The strength in it surprised her. For a breath, neither moved. She could feel the calluses on his palm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Could feel the warmth of his fingers. Thank you. Careful of that board. He let go. She walked inside without looking back, but she could still feel the warmth where his hand had been. The church social. Silas told her on Saturday night while they were sitting on the porch watching the last light drain from the sky. We're going to the church social tomorrow. Clara's hand stilled on the mending in her lap. No. If we hide, they win. Let them win. I don't care anymore. I do. She looked at him then. Really looked. He'd shaved that morning, trimmed his hair with the scissors from the kitchen drawer. His jaw was set in a way she'd come to recognize the look of a man who'd made up his mind. Silas, they'll stare. They'll whisper. They'll make us feel like we've done something wrong. Then let them stare. Let them whisper. He turned to face her. But I won't let them make us hide. Not anymore. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him it was easier to stay home to avoid the judgment, to pretend the outside world didn't exist. But something in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't asking her to be brave for herself. He was asking her to be brave for him. For both of them. All right, she said quietly. We'll go. Sunday morning came clear and bright. Clara wore her blue calico dress, the same one she'd worn to meet Thaddeus. It felt different now, like reclaiming something that had been taken from her. Silas wore a white shirt and a string tie that had belonged to his father. He stood in the doorway of his room, working the knot with fingers that weren't quite steady. Here. Clara crossed to him, brushed his hands away, and tied it herself. Her fingers knew the work she'd tied her father's ties 100 times before he died. But standing this close to Silas, close enough to smell the soap he'd used and see the pulse beating in his throat, made her hands want to shake. She stepped back when she was done. He caught her hand. Thank you for agreeing to this. Don't thank me yet. You ain't seen how bad I get when I'm nervous. The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. Elijah Hayes had loaned them his buckboard for the occasion. The old man had shown up that morning with the wagon washed and the leather oiled, refusing to take no for an answer. Can't have a lady riding side-saddled to a church social, he'd said. Ain't proper. The church hall stood at the end of Main Street, white-painted and plain. Wagons and horses crowded the yard. The sound of a fiddle drifted through the open doors, accompanied by the murmur of voices and laughter. Silas climbed down first, then turned to help Clara. Her hand trembled as she took his arm. Ready, he asked. No, me neither. He tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow. Let's go anyway. They walked through the doors together. The hall fell silent. It happened in a wave, conversations dying mid-sentence, heads turning, eyes fixing on the couple in the doorway. The fiddle player stopped mid-note, his bow hovering above the strings. Clara felt every gaze like a physical weight. Her leg ached from the wagon ride, and she knew her limp was more pronounced than usual. She wanted to turn around, wanted to run back to the buckboard and hide. Silas's arm tightened against her hand. He didn't slow down. They walked to the refreshment table. A glass pitcher of lemonade stood sweating in the heat. Silas poured 2 glasses, handed one to Clara, and turned to survey the room. No one approached. Families huddled in tight clusters, their backs turned. Women whispered behind their fans. Men studied the floor with sudden fascination. The fiddle started up again, tentative. A few couples drifted toward the dancing area. Conversation resumed in low murmurs. Then Thaddeus Pritchard pushed through the crowd. He was dressed in his Sunday best dark suit, polished boots, that ridiculous mustache waxed to sharp points. His mother followed a few steps behind her, face pinched with disapproval. Well, well. Thaddeus's voice carried across the hall. Look who finally showed his face and brought his little... Careful now. Silas's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Next word out of your mouth better be ma'am. Thaddeus stopped. His eyes narrowed. Or what? Silas set down his lemonade glass. He turned to face Thaddeus fully, his shoulders square, his hands loose at his sides. Or nothing. I ain't going to hit you. He paused. But I am going to tell every person in this room exactly what kind of man you are. And I got a feeling they already know. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Thaddeus's face reddened. You got some nerve, Monroe. Coming in here with your charity case acting like... Charity case, Silas's voice rose slightly, not shouting, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Is that what you call her? He took a step forward. Thaddeus took a step back. This woman walked 2 miles in the Arizona heat to help a stranger. Found me half dead on the floor of my own house. Blood poisoning so bad, the doc had given up. Another step. She cleaned my wound with her own petticoat. Sat up 3 nights straight, brewing willow bark tea. Kept me alive when I had no reason to keep living. The hall had gone silent again. Even the fiddle player had stopped. She worked without pay, without thanks, never once complained. She scrubbed my floors and washed my windows and brought that ranch back from the dead with nothing but her 2 hands and her own sweat. Silas turned to face the crowd now. To face Mrs. Pritchard, standing rigid with fury. To face all of them. You call her shameful. You look at her leg and decide that's all she is. He shook his head slowly. The only shame I see in this room is a man who judges a woman's worth by the way she walks instead of what she does with her hands. The silence stretched. Thaddeus's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Then Silas turned back to him. His voice dropped, became almost conversational. You ordered her from Ohio, made her promises, told her you wanted a partner, plain and simple, and then you took one look at her leg and left her standing on a train platform. Didn't even have the decency to say a word. He stepped closer, close enough that Thaddeus had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. She's worth 10 of you, 20, and every person in this room knows it. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Thaddeus spun on his heel and walked out. His mother followed, her face white with rage. The door slammed behind them. The silence held. Clara stood frozen by the refreshment table, her lemonade forgotten in her hand. Her chest was tight. Her eyes burned. Then footsteps crossed the wooden floor. Elijah Hayes stopped in front of her. His face was weathered kind. He extended his hand. Miss Hartwell, I knew Silas's daddy. He'd be proud tonight. She took his hand. Her fingers were trembling. Behind Hayes, the schoolmistress approached, a thin woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She nodded at Clara, a small, precise gesture of acknowledgement. Then the pastor's wife. Then a farmer Clara didn't recognize. Then a young mother with a baby on her hip. One by one they came. Not many, perhaps a dozen in a room of 50, but enough. Enough to form a small circle around Clara and Silas. To create a barrier against the whispers and stares. The fiddle started up again. Someone laughed. The tension in the room began to ease. Silas turned to Clara. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. May I? He extended his hand. I can't dance well. Neither can I. She set down her lemonade and took his hand. He led her to the dancing area. The fiddle played a slow waltz. Other couples joined them on the floor. Silas held her carefully like she was something precious. They moved together, awkward and unsure, but together. Clara looked up at him. Why did you do that? Because it was true. Because somebody needed to say it. He was quiet for a moment. And because you deserve to hear it, even if you don't believe it yet. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just rested her head against his shoulder and let him lead her through the dance. 3 days later, Wednesday night, the trouble started on a Wednesday night, 3 days after the church social. Silas woke to a sound he couldn't identify, something between a crash and a bellow. He grabbed his rifle from beside the bed and moved to the window. The moon was full, painting everything in shades of silver and black. At first, he saw nothing. Then movement by the barn caught his eye. He was pulling on his boots when Clara appeared in her doorway wrapped in Lydia's shawl. What is it? Don't know. Stay inside. Like hell. She followed him out onto the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and something else, something copper and wrong. They smelled the blood before they saw it. 6 cows lay in the dirt of the corral. Their throats cut, their bodies still warm. The ground was dark with spreading pools that looked black in the moonlight. Clara made a sound, small and choked. Silas moved past her, rifle ready, scanning the darkness for whoever had done this. A piece of paper was nailed to the fence post. He tore it down, brought it close to read by moonlight. The handwriting was crude but clear. Give her back, or lose more. T.P. Thaddeus, Clara whispered. She'd come up behind him, reading over his shoulder. He did this because of what you said, because of me. Silas crumpled the note in his fist. He did this because he's a coward. I should go. I'll go to him, tell him I'll leave and he'll stop. No. Silas turned, caught her shoulders. He wants us scared, wants you running. Don't give him that. But he'll kill them all. The cattle are all you have. I have you. That's what matters. The words hung between them in the cool night air. Clara's eyes were wide, frightened. But something else moved in them too. Something that made Silas's chest tight. We moved the rest of the cattle at first light, he said. Up to the box canyon where we found them. He won't find them there. And then we wait and we watch. And if he comes back, Silas looked down at the rifle in his hands. We'll be ready. They spent the next day moving the remaining cattle 9 head up to the hidden canyon. It was hard work made harder by the knowledge that someone was watching, waiting. Sheriff Anderson came out that afternoon, a tired man with a beer gut and eyes that had seen too much. Can't arrest a man for signing a note tieso, he said, turning his hat in his hands. Could be anyone with those initials. We both know who did it. Knowing ain't proof, Monroe. You catch him in the act, I'll arrest him. Until then, he shrugged. My hands are tied. After the sheriff left, Silas and Clara sat on the porch with the rifle across his knees. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The danger had drawn them closer together, like 2 people huddling against a storm. Tell me something about Lydia I don't know, Clara said as the sun set. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then, she used to sing, not well but loud. Drove Pa crazy, but it made Ma smile. After Ma died, the house got real quiet. Lydia stopped singing. I'm sorry. She kept this place running after Pa passed. Taught me to read, to keep accounts, to see beyond the work. His voice was softer now. She deserved better than dying alone in a fever bed. She wasn't alone. You were with her. Yeah, I was. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Silas reached over and took her hand, just held it. His palm was rough with work, warm and solid. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I want you to know these past weeks have been the best I've had in 2 years. Silas, let me finish. I was dead before you came. Maybe not in body, but in every way that counted. You gave me a reason to care again. To try. And He stopped, struggling with words. I don't want to lose that. Don't want to lose you. Clara squeezed his hand. You won't, not if I have anything to say about it. The attack, Saturday night. It came on Saturday night, 4 days after the cattle killing. Silas had been dozing in the chair by the window, the rifle across his lap. Clara was in her room trying to sleep, but mostly just staring at the ceiling. The sound of hoofbeats brought them both upright. 6 riders came out of the darkness, torches held high. Thaddeus Pritchard in the lead, flanked by 5 men Clara didn't recognize, hired guns from the look of them. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. Clara came to stand behind him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Monroe," Thaddeus's voice carried across the yard. "Last chance, send her out or we take her. She's not going anywhere." "Then you're both fools." Thaddeus gestured to his men. They dismounted, hands moving to their gun belts. Silas raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at Thaddeus's chest. "I got 6 shots. Figure I can get at least 3 of you before you get me. Question is, which 3 want to die tonight?" The hired guns hesitated, looking at each other. None of them seemed eager to be first. "You got 1 rifle, Monroe. We got 6 guns. Do the math. Then you'll be the first one I kill, Pritchard. That I promise." Clara watched Thaddeus's face go pale in the torchlight. For a moment, everything hung suspended, the night, the men, the future. Then new voices called out from the darkness. "He ain't alone." Elijah Hayes rode in from the left, rifle across his saddle. Behind him came 4 more men, farmers from the church social Clara recognized. They formed a line between the ranch house and Thaddeus's hired guns. "We've been watching your property, Pritchard," Hayes called out. "Saw you kill those cattle 3 nights ago. Got witnesses. Sheriff's on his way." "That's a lie." "Is it? Then why's Mitch here looking so nervous?" Hayes pointed at one of the hired guns, a young man who'd gone white as chalk. "He already confessed, Thaddeus. Told us everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. Said you paid him to cut those cattle. Said you were planning worse tonight." Mitch stepped away from the others, hands raised. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pritchard. I got a family. Can't hang for you." Thaddeus whirled on him. "I paid you. Not enough to die for." Before the sheriff could arrive, Thaddeus turned on Silas one last time. His face twisted with rage, all pretense of control gone. "You think you've won that crippled whore will?" Silas didn't let him finish. He stepped forward. One stride. The rifle clattered to the porch. His fist connected with Thaddeus's jaw. Crack! The sound echoed across the yard. Clean. Final. Perfect. Thaddeus spun backward off his horse, hit the ground hard, and lay still. Clara gasped. The hired guns froze. Even Hayes looked surprised. Silas stood over him, shaking out his hand. Blood trickled from split knuckles. His voice came out cold and level. "Don't ever speak about my wife that way." The sound of approaching horses. Sheriff Anderson rode in with 2 deputies, all 3 with guns drawn. The sheriff took in the scene. Thaddeus sprawled unconscious in the dirt, Silas standing over him with bloodied knuckles, the hired guns with their hands raised. "Well," Anderson said slowly, "looks like we got here just in time. Or maybe a minute too late." He glanced at Silas's hand. "Self-defense, I reckon." He was threatening Miss Hartwell. "I'm sure he was." The sheriff dismounted. "Thaddeus Pritchard, you're under arrest for destruction of property, conspiracy to commit assault, and general stupidity. Deputies take him and his boys into custody." Silas watched as they put Thaddeus in irons. The man was just coming around, his jaw already swelling purple. Watched as the hired guns surrendered their weapons. Watched as the whole rotten thing collapsed like a house of cards. When it was over, when the last horse had ridden away toward town, he lowered his aching hand and turned to Clara. She was standing in the doorway, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He pulled her into his arms, held her while she shook, while the fear and adrenaline drained away and left only exhaustion. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's over. He can't hurt you anymore." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were clear. "You called me your wife." He stilled, realized what he'd said. I didn't mean..." "Silas?" She put her hand over his heart. "We need to talk about what happens next." "All right, let's talk." But neither of them moved. They just stood there on the porch holding each other while the night settled back into silence around them. The week after Thaddeus's arrest, the town changed. Mrs. Pritchard left Copper Springs on the Monday morning stage, her face hidden behind a black veil, heading east to live with family in Phoenix. The women who'd whispered about Clara in the mercantile now nodded politely when they passed her on the street. Mr. Perkins gave her 10% off her purchases without being asked. For friends of Silas Monroe, he said, wrapping her flower in brown paper. But the victory felt hollow to Clara. She stood in the kitchen that Saturday evening, exactly 1 week after the attack, watching the sun set through the clean windows she'd washed, and felt the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't stay here forever. Not like this. Not as the woman who lived with Silas Monroe, but wasn't his wife. Not as someone balanced between gratitude and something deeper she was afraid to name. The town might have stopped whispering, but she knew what they still thought. What they would always think until she made a choice leave or legitimize her presence here in a way that made sense to their ordered world. And staying meant, what? Becoming a permanent housekeeper. A companion. Something neither of them had words for. She heard Silas come in from evening chores, heard him washing up at the pump outside. When he stepped through the door, she was sitting at the table, hands folded in front of her. "Silas, I need to talk to you about something." He hung his hat on the peg by the door. "All right. I've been thinking about what comes next." "So have I." She looked up surprised. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his hands flat on the scarred wood of the table. "Clara, I know this ain't normal, the way we've been living, what you've been doing for me." He stopped searching for words. "I know people talk. Know it bothers you even if you don't say so. It's not that I care what they think, but you do, and you should." He leaned forward. "You deserve better than being the subject of gossip. Better than living in a dead woman's room wearing a dead woman's shawl cooking meals for a man who ain't your husband or your family." Clara's throat tightened. "Where is this going?" "I'm trying to say—" He stopped, drew a breath. "I'm trying to say that I can't ask you to stay like this. It ain't fair to you." The words hit her like a fist to the chest. "So you want me to leave?" "No." He reached across the table, caught her hand. "God, no, the opposite. I want—" He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. "Come with me." He pulled her to her feet, kept hold of her hand, and led her out onto the porch. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked too vivid to be real. "Look at this place," Silas said, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them. "When you came here, it was dying. I was dying. Everything was just waiting for the end." Clara looked, saw the repaired chicken coop, the clean windows catching the last light, the garden she'd brought back from the weeds, the cattle in the far pasture, their shapes dark against the golden grass. "You did this," he continued, "not just fixing things. You made it alive again. Made me alive again." He turned to face her, both hands gripping hers now. "And I can't imagine waking up tomorrow and not seeing you here. Can't imagine eating a meal you didn't cook, or sitting on this porch without hearing you hum. Can't imagine any kind of future that doesn't have you in it." "Silas, let me finish, please." His voice shook slightly. "I ain't good at this. Never was. Lydia used to say I had all the charm of a fence post, but I need you to understand something." He released her hands, stepped back, and then slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to one knee on the weathered porch boards. Clara's breath stopped. "I don't have much to offer you," he said, looking up at her. "Got a ranch that's barely holding on. Got a name that's been dragged through the mud. Got a past full of grief and a future that's uncertain at best." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's. Only valuable thing I own. And I'm asking no, I'm begging if you'll take it. If you'll take me." Clara's hands went to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know I ain't the man you came west to marry. I'm not rich or handsome or any of the things you probably dreamed about back in Ohio, but I promise you this, I'll never leave you standing on a platform. I'll never look at you and see anything but the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. And I'll never, ever let you stand alone again." His voice broke on the last words. He swallowed hard, blinked back wetness in his own eyes. "Clara Hartwell, will you marry me? Not because you got nowhere else to go, but because this is where you belong, here, with me, for whatever time God gives us." The sunset blurred through her tears. She couldn't speak, could only nod over and over until finally she choked out a single word. "Yes." Silas surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms. The ring fell from his fingers, clattered on the porch boards. Neither of them cared. He held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "Yes," she said again, louder this time. "Yes, Silas, yes." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. Then he kissed her, gentle, at first tentative, like he was afraid she might break. But Clara pressed closer, and the kiss deepened, became something neither of them had known they were capable of. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "Should have said that first probably. But I love you, Clara, more than I knew and I would love anything. I love you too." The words came easy, natural. Been trying not to for weeks. Didn't work. He laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. Then he dropped to his knees again, searching the porch boards until he found the ring. He slipped it onto her finger. It was loose, but not too loose, like it had been waiting for her all along. They stood on the porch as the stars came out, hands clasped, the ring warm against Clara's skin. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. 2 months later, October 1884, October came to Arizona with cooler nights and the smell of autumn in the air. The ranch had transformed in the weeks since the proposal. Silas and Clara worked side by side, preparing not just for the wedding, but for the life that would come after. They repaired the porch, replacing rotten boards and painting the railings white. Clara planted roses along the front walk, cuttings from Mrs. Fletcher, the pastor's wife, who'd softened toward her after the church social. The roses wouldn't bloom until spring, but Clara liked knowing they were there, waiting, like the future. Silas bought a new bed, oak frame hand-carved by the carpenter in town. It replaced the narrow cot he'd slept on since his father died. They set it up in his room, their room now, with new linens Clara had sewn herself. She took down Lydia's sampler from the wall, folded it carefully, and placed it in the trunk with Lydia's letters and the shawl Clara still wore on cold evenings. In its place, she hung a new sampler, the fabric still blank. After the wedding, she would embroider her name there. Clara Monroe, a new beginning. The townspeople rallied in ways that surprised them both. Elijah Hayes offered his barn for the reception. Mrs. Fletcher and the other churchwomen organized food. Even Mr. Perkins donated coffee and sugar for the cake. "Town takes care of its own," Hayes said when Silas tried to pay him, "and you two are ours now." The night before the wedding, Clara stood in what had been Lydia's room, looking at the wedding dress hanging on the back of the door. Simple white cotton, no lace or frills. Mrs. Fletcher had helped her sew it, their heads bent together over the fabric, talking in low voices about marriage and hope and second chances. A knock on the door frame. Silas stood there looking uncertain. "Ain't supposed to seat the bride before the wedding," Clara said. "That's the dress, not you." He stepped into the room. "Can't sleep." "Me neither." They sat on the narrow bed, shoulders touching. Through the thin walls, they could hear the crickets singing the distant call of a coyote. "You scared?" Silas asked. "Terrified." "Me too." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "What if I'm not good at being a wife? What if you'll be perfect?" His arm came around her. "You already are." She smiled despite herself. "What are you scared of?" "Letting you down, not being enough, waking up one day and finding out this was all a dream." Clara took his hand, pressed it against her cheek. "It's real. We're real." They sat like that until the moon rose high enough to shine through the window, painting everything in silver. Then Silas kissed her forehead and stood. "Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." "You too." But neither of them slept much that night. They lay in their separate rooms, separated by a wall that would no longer divide them after tomorrow, counting the hours until dawn. The wedding, Sunday, October 12, 1884. The church was full. That surprised Clara most of all. She'd expected a handful of people, Hayes the Fletchers, maybe a few of the farmers who'd defended them against Thaddeus. But every pew was packed. She recognized faces from the mercantile, from the church social, from passing on the street. People she didn't know had come to witness this unlikely union. She stood in the small room behind the sanctuary, smoothing down her dress for the 100th time. Her hands shook. The ring Silas had given her, his mother's ring, felt heavy on her finger. "Ready, my dear?" Mrs. Fletcher appeared in the doorway, smiling. "I don't know." "That's the right answer." The older woman came closer, adjusted Clara's hair where a pin had come loose. "If you weren't nervous, I'd worry. Means you understand what you're taking on. A life, a real life, after so long of just existing." Exactly. Mrs. Fletcher squeezed her hand. And you deserve it. Every bit of it. Music started in the sanctuary. The simple melody of a hymn played on the church's old piano. Clara's cue. Elijah Hayes waited at the door to walk her down the aisle, the closest thing to a father she had in this new world. He offered his arm, his weathered face gentle. Shall we? The doors opened. Everyone stood. And there at the front of the church stood Silas. He wore a black suit she'd never seen before, borrowed from Hayes, who was close to his size. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved. But what struck her most was his expression. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world, like she hung the moon and stars. Clara forgot to be nervous. Forgot about her leg, about the people watching, about everything except putting one foot in front of the other until she reached him. Hayes placed her hand in Silas's. Step back. Pastor Fletcher began the ceremony, but Clara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Silas's face, on the way his hand trembled slightly in hers, on the tear that escaped and traced down his cheek. Do you, Silas Monroe, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health until death do you part? Silas's voice came out strong and clear. I do. And do you, Clara Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health until death do you part? Clara looked into Silas's eyes, saw her whole future there, saw mornings on the porch and evenings by the fire, saw children that might come, gray hairs and wrinkled hands still clasped together, saw a life worth living. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. Pastor Fletcher smiled. Silas, you may kiss your bride. Silas cupped her face in both hands, gentle, as if she were made of glass. The kiss was soft, sweet, and when they pulled apart, Clara heard Mrs. Fletcher sniffling in the front pew. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and this time when people stared, it was with smiles, with joy, with the blessing of a community that had come to accept them as their own. The reception at Hayes' barn was simple but joyful. Tables laden with food, a fiddle player in the corner, lanterns hung from the rafters casting warm light over everything. Clara danced with Silas, then with Hayes, then with a dozen other men who wanted to congratulate her. Her leg ached, but she didn't care. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Silas pulled her aside to a quiet corner. Happy? Beyond words. He kissed her temple. Ready to go home. Our home. Our home. They slipped away while the party continued, climbing into Hayes's buckboard one last time. The old man had insisted on loaning it for their wedding night, had even tied tin cans to the back and painted "Just Married" across the side in shaky letters. The ride home was quiet, peaceful. Clara leaned against Silas's shoulder, watching the moon rise over the hills. When they reached the ranch, Silas lifted her down from the wagon. Then before she could protest, he swept her up in his arms. What are you doing, carrying my wife over the threshold? Ain't that the custom? Your arm is fine. He kicked open the door and carried her inside, setting her down gently in front of the fireplace. Welcome home, Mrs. Monroe. Mrs. Monroe. She'd been practicing writing it for weeks, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way nothing else had. I like the sound of that, she whispered. So do I. He lit the lamp on the mantel, and in its warm glow, Clara saw he'd decorated. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, the good blanket on their new bed, everything clean and ready and theirs. They stood facing each other, suddenly shy, married but still uncertain, knowing each other but not in this way, not yet. Silas reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. We got time, no rush, I just want... He stopped, started again. I just want you to know you're safe. Always. With me, you're always safe. Clara took his hand, pressed a kiss to his palm. I know. I've known since the day I found you half dead, and you still tried to protect me from ghosts. Lydia would have liked you. I wish I'd known her. You do, in a way. She's in this house, in the book she taught me to read, in the garden she planted. And now you're here making it live again. Making it more than it was. Better. Clara kissed him then, and this time there was no audience. No need for restraint. They learned each other slowly, carefully, two people who'd been broken, finding wholeness in the joining. Later, lying in the new bed with Silas's arm around her and the moonlight streaming through the window, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace, joy, home. "What are you thinking?" Silas murmured against her hair. "That I'm glad Thaddeus Pritchard left me at that train station." She felt him smile. "Why's that?" "Because it brought me here. To you. To this." She turned in his arms to face him. "I came west looking for a husband. Found a home instead. Found myself. Found everything I didn't know I needed. I came back from the edge of dying and found a reason to live." He kissed her forehead. "Reckon we both got lucky." "Reckon we did." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and the quiet certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. 6 months later, April 1885. Spring came to the Monroe Ranch in a wash of color. The roses Clara had planted bloomed pink and white along the front walk. The garden she'd expanded burst with new growth, tomatoes, squash, beans climbing their poles. Wildflowers dotted the hills, turning them golden purple. The cattle had grown to 15 head, including 3 new calves born that spring. Silas had hired a hand, a quiet young man named Pete, who needed work and didn't ask questions. The ranch was turning profitable again. Not rich, but steady. Enough. Clara stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swelling belly, watching Silas and Pete mend fence in the far pasture. 4 months along now, and the baby made its presence known with kicks and flutters that still amazed her. A new sampler hung on the wall inside, finished just last week. Clara Monroe, 1884, in careful stitches with a border of roses and stars. Beneath it, she'd started another, smaller, for the child who would come in late summer. She heard a wagon approaching and shaded her eyes. Mrs. Fletcher come for their weekly visit. The older woman had become something like a mother to Clara, teaching her the things her own mother hadn't lived to share: how to can vegetables for winter, how to predict rain by the feel of the air, how to prepare for a first baby. "You're glowing," Mrs. Fletcher said as she climbed down from her wagon. "I'm sweating, it's hot." "That too," the older woman laughed. "But you're happy. Anyone can see that." They sat on the porch with lemonade, watching the men work. Mrs. Fletcher had brought fabric for baby clothes, and they discussed patterns and colors, while their hands stayed busy. "Have you thought about names?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. Clara's hand went to her belly. "If it's a girl, Catherine, after Silas's mother. If it's a boy," she paused. "We were thinking Thomas, for his father. They'd be honored, both of them." Silas came back at sunset, dusty and tired but smiling. That was new, the smiling. Clara had kept count in the early days of their marriage, noting each time his face cracked into something resembling joy. Now it came easy, natural, like breathing. He washed up at the pump while Clara finished dinner. They'd fallen into rhythms, these two people who'd been strangers 6 months ago. She knew how he liked his coffee. He knew she needed a moment of quiet in the morning before she could talk. Small things that added up to a life. That night, after Pete had gone to his bunk in the barn and the dishes were washed and put away, they sat on the porch as they did most evenings. Silas had his arm around her, his hand resting on her belly, feeling for the baby's movements. "Kicked me today while I was kneading bread," Clara said. "Right in the ribs. Strong. Takes after the mother. Or the father, you're the stubborn one. Takes 2 stubborn people to make this work." Clara looked out at the land they had brought back from the edge, at the house that had been dying and now lived, at the future growing inside her. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" she asked. "What would have happened if Thaddeus had been different?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "Every day. And I'm grateful he was exactly who he was, grateful he was fool enough to leave you there. Because otherwise," he tightened his arm around her, "otherwise I'd have died in that bed. The ranch would have gone to auction. None of this would exist. I used to be angry about it, the rejection, the humiliation. And now I think maybe some things that look like endings are just new beginnings in disguise." She turned to look at him. "I came here broken, Silas. Broken leg, broken heart, broken dreams. And you were broken too. But somehow we put each other back together. Made something new from the pieces. Something better." The baby kicked strong enough for both of them to feel. Silas laughed, pressed his palm flat against Clara's belly. Little one's impatient, wants to meet the world, wants to meet you. Clara covered his hand with hers. You're going to be a good father. How do you know? Because you're a good man. Because you see people really see them for who they are, not what they look like or where they come from. You saw me that way. You'll see our child that way too. Tears shone in Silas's eyes. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I love you, he whispered. God, I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, and I'm not scared anymore. Of anything. They sat like that until the stars filled the sky, until the moon rose high and white, until the night wrapped around them like a blanket. Inside the house waited clean and warm and full of life. The sampler on the wall proclaimed Clara's place there. The new furniture they'd bought together. The books on the shelf they'd started reading aloud to each other in the evenings. The cradle Silas had built, waiting in the corner for the child who would soon fill it. And beyond the house, the land stretched out to meet the horizon. The cattle in their pasture, the garden growing, the roses blooming. Everything they'd built from nothing but hope and hard work and a love neither of them had seen coming. Clara thought about the girl who'd stepped off the train 9 months ago, scared, rejected, desperate. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who'd found her home not by being chosen, but by choosing, by staying, by fighting for something worth having. You know what I think, she said into the quiet night. What's that? I think broken things can make the strongest foundations, because they have been tested, been through fire, and come out still standing. Silas kissed the top of her head. Wise woman I married. She learned from a wise man. They went inside as the temperature dropped as the first stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Tomorrow would bring work and worry and all the small struggles of making a life. But tonight there was only this two people who'd found each other in the hardest possible way and chosen to build something lasting. The door closed behind them. Through the window, lamplight glowed warm and golden. The sound of their laughter drifted out into the desert night, mixing with the cricket's song and the rustle of wind through sage. The Monroe Ranch lived, and it would keep living generation after generation, built on the foundation of two broken people who refused to stay broken, who chose love over fear, who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier, who chose each other every day for the rest of their lives. And that in the end was enough.